is Dan Pimpin. I'm the facilities manager here, and you guys are here to talk about waste handling. This is from UN 131. This is a new SOP that has recently been approved that went into effect 28 November. So if you haven't had the opportunity to review UN 131 along with the 4 attachments, I would recommend that in your next spare time that you download that exciting information off the K drive and peruse it at your leisure. But we are going to talk about a lot of what's in UN 131. We're going to go through some examples of how we execute the attachments of UN 131 and then hopefully answer questions around waste handling for the Lenexa site. So everyone should have an attachment, 3 training documents. So let's see, you're going to have 1 safety data sheet. You're going to have 3 attachment number 2s, which are the waste determination form. And then if you have the attachment 1, which is our list codes, if you don't have one, you guys can share the safety data sheets and the attachment 1, but everyone will need 3 copies of attachment 2 in order to play today. So this morning we're going to go over all of our waste handling procedures. We're going to look at it from a regulatory point of view. So we're going to talk about why we do it. We're going to talk about classifications, determinations, the appropriate handling techniques, how we accumulate, and then what we do in cases of emergencies. What I've found is that really we're here to accomplish 2 goals. Number 1 is to better understand how we do waste determination and then how we handle that waste on campus. So if we walk away with those 2 concepts ingrained in us, I will consider today's training to be a success. There's a lot of additional information in here that's probably just good to know to understand the why behind what we do with our waste. But I am going to hit you with a whole lot today. But again, the goal is, can I make a waste determination that allows me to understand how I'm supposed to handle this waste here on our site? So who cares about waste?
We all do.
Oh, great answer. We all do, right? But from a regulatory point of view, here are the agencies that care about waste at our facilities. So just as our products are highly regulated, our waste is highly regulated. It starts at the federal level with the USDA, and then it actually goes all the way down to the city of Lenexa when it comes to our wastewater discharge. So we are regulated on every level of government possible when it comes to our waste. Now, why should we care about waste?
It's dangerous.
Right, so the regulatory agencies are concerned with it, so that should be a key that we should probably also be, but it is dangerous, right? Where does this waste end up?
In our waters.
Right, it could end up in our waters if we incorrectly dispose of it, right? It's going to the city of Lenexa, to their water stream, and then guess where that water goes? Right back to us, right? So there is an environmental aspect of it, there is a compliance aspect of it. We can be fined if we are incorrectly handling, and those fines could be pretty substantial from a business point of view. But also we want to be good stewards of our environment, and that could have an impact on our reputation as well if it comes out that we are purposefully not handling waste correctly or in accordance with our standards. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to define what is waste. So the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, this is the definition that they give to waste. I'm not going to go through that whole thing, but I'll give you guys a second to read through it. And if for some reason you don't like that one, here's one from the USDA. So I'll give you your choice. But the key takeaway to the idea of waste is it's any garbage, refuse, or sludge. So when we start looking at what it means to do waste determination in our areas, which is something that we're going to have to do as departments and something that gets reviewed on an annual basis, we need to understand, okay, well, what is waste in the first place? And that's why that definition is important. We got it? All right. Here's one from the EPA. The EPA created what's called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Has anyone ever heard of that? It's also known as RCRA. if you've heard that term before. 1976, great year, the year I was born. How many people were before, way after that? Mostly, very few people that probably be before that. So this is simply a law that the federal government established in 1976 that directs how waste is handled in an industry. So we do have an EPA ID. We're regulated by them. We have to make waste determinations for all of our waste. We have to meet the standards for how we handle it. And then we also have to have contingencies in place for emergencies as a result of the waste that we maintain here on site. The last bullet point says we own our waste from cradle to grave. Someone tell me what they think that means.
It's ours to get to the trash.
Okay, say it again.
It's ours to get to the trash.
It's ours until it gets in the trash. How about further than that?
Until it's no longer toxic.
Till it's no longer existing, right? So when we put we put items in Stericycle bins. Let's just say it's infectious waste, and we store it over here, and we load that up on Stericycle. Does Stericycle own that waste, or do we when they drive it off the lot? We still own it, right? It's still our responsibility. Even though we're using a third-party contractor to handle that waste, we technically, from a law point of view, are still responsible for that waste until it's incinerated at Stericycle. So once Stericycle reports back to us that that waste has been disposed of, that's the grave for that waste. So if Stericycle is doing things incorrectly, we're still liable for that waste. That's fun, isn't it? All right, so this just talks about infectious waste. We need to understand infectious waste because primarily this is a lot of the things that we deal with, the roller bottles that we use here on campus. Things that become in contact with a lot of our processes are considered infectious waste, and it's a category. So we need to understand that from a regulatory point, we are responsible to handle this waste appropriately. Give you guys just a second to read down through these. Most people in here are going to be familiar with VSM 80-56, which is one of the memorandums that highly or covers a lot of the ways that we dispose of waste here on campus. And it talks about how they are to be done correctly. How many people have read that document? Sean, congratulations. Share it with your friends. All right, so there's going to be 4 classifications of waste that we have on site: infectious, hazardous, non-hazard, and rubbish, which is a fancy term for just regular trash. We're going to go through each one of these. Here's the KDHE definition of infectious waste. There's probably, I would say, out of all the categories, this and hazardous are going to be the 2 main types of trash that we deal with, outside of rubbish, which is just stuff that we discharge into our dumpsters on a day-to-day basis. So here's the USDA. Anything stand out? Pretty simple concept of what infectious waste is. Any questions on it? In the Army, we say north and south. That's where you just nod your head. Yeah, I get it. Everybody's north and south on this one. All right. Let's talk about hazardous waste. What's the difference between hazardous waste and infectious waste? You may want to take a stab while you put the definitions on there. What's infectious waste coming in contact with? Well, how's infectious waste get created? Back on our definition, right? Comes in contact with the virus.
Or bacteria.
Say again?
Virus or bacteria.
Virus or bacteria, right? So hazardous is going to be chemically based. So this is going to be chemical agents, cleaning, other types of chemicals that we use on campus. They usually have characteristics that involve, being corrosive, being flammable, being reactive or toxic. They are regulated differently, so we won't send them off to Stericycle. We'll collect them, we'll give them classifications, and they'll come and lab pack that stuff up. How many people deal with hazardous waste in their current processes? Right? Not everyone, but some people. So it's important to understand that, because this isn't something that we just, we have to dispose of it appropriately, which involves you guys understanding first that it is hazardous waste, and then understanding our procedures to dispose of that waste properly here at the Lenexa site. All right, so here's some signage for what these items look like. When it comes to flammability, it needs to have a flash point that's less than 60 degrees C. If it's corrosive, it has a pH of less than 2 or greater than 12.5. If it is reactive, that means when it mixes with something else, something bad could happen. Or toxic, meaning it has an impact to the environment or to the people handling it. Where's a good place of information to understand these characteristics when it comes to hazardous material?
SDS.
Right, SDS, right? That's the one of the items that you guys have in front of us, right? Because I'm not a science person, right? So someone hands me a material and they want me to understand what the pH level is, I'm out. I don't understand. I don't know most of the time, right? But I know that I can go to the safety data sheet and get a better understanding of what the pH level of that material is, and therefore how to handle it appropriately. All right, there are lists. That's what you're going to see in attachment 1. So the United States government was nice enough to create lists for us to help us better understand hazardous material and how to handle them. They're P list, U list, F, and K list. The two lists that we'll deal primarily with in our sector are the P and the U list chemicals. F and K are industry specific. There isn't one for the pharmaceutical world, so we don't see that. That's a lot of paper, wood, those type of environments that have different processes. But for us, the P and the U list are going to be the most important that you're going to see in your attachment 1. All right, when it comes to pesticides, they are handled a little bit differently. How many people use pesticides here on campus? When you think of pesticides, what do you think about? Probably think about like Presto X guy, right? Out spraying for insects around our site. But do you know we have pesticides here in the form of cleaning agents? Yeah. All right, so we need to understand that these containers and materials must be treated as well. The number one thing that we probably need to take away is that if you read a bottle of pesticide, it will say that you can dispose of it by triple rinsing it, which means if you empty out the container, if you triple rinse it, you can then just dispose of it as rubbish. We here at SEVA do not have the ability to do that. We don't have a rinse permit from the county. So I think Merrick's right now, they have bottles of alcohol that they use for cleaning, that they now have to take those empty bottles over to our hazardous waste pod, and we have those removed through our hazardous waste pickup program. So it's little things like that. What's the best way to understand what this is? For me, it's an EPA number assigned on the bottle itself. So when you look at a package, and I think we have an example, here's our Centramax. There's two places that you can look at. Number one is the container disposal method, which is outlined on the label itself. And the second one is a little EPA registration number. That lets us know that this is a FIFRA chemical. Anyone want to take a guess at what FIFRA stands for? I bet Kevin knows. Kevin, what's it stand for?
Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act.
Everybody get that? So it's fungicides, insecticides, rodenticides. All those chemicals have an EPA number and therefore aren't allowed just to simply be, those containers after they're used are not allowed to be thrown in the trash. Any questions on that? Does everybody know that? I didn't know that. All right, non-hazardous. So there are a number of materials that we'll use here on campus that will fall into the non-hazardous classification. So this is waste that simply does not meet regulatory standards as hazardous waste. That's a good thing. But it should not be put in sanitary wastewater systems or landfills. So here's some examples of things that could include that we have on campus. I think everyone's probably familiar with some of these things. So we would mark these things as non-hazardous waste, but we would still handle them through our facilities department. And then lastly, well, here's rules for water discharge. I'll let you read those. I think most people here know what they're allowed to put down the drain and what they're not allowed to put down the drain, and if you're not, you should seek that information out through your supervisor. And if you don't know, ask, right? It's okay not to know, but it's not okay to act on a lack of information. We have to get the correct information before we act.
The big thing on that one is the pH. So if you remember, the pH criteria for hazardous waste was 2 to 12.5. Well, Johnson County wastewater has an even tighter limit on pH. So just because something's not a hazardous waste, it still doesn't mean it could necessarily go down the drain. If it's outside of 5.5 to 10.5 on pH, then we still have to either neutralize it to get within that or handle it as non-hazardous waste.
Yeah, that's a good point. As we stated earlier, the federal government, they kind of set the standards, but they allow every state and municipality underneath them to create regulations within there if they want a higher level of regulation. So the federal government, kind of throws the blanket statements out, then they allow the states to determine whether or not they want to improve upon those regulations through, tighter restrictions or changes that don't have an impact to the federal government law. And so this is one of the ones that we see that Kevin brought up is pH level for water discharge here in Kansas. All right, so here's the idea of rubbish. A lot of people struggle with rubbish. They think it's a European term or an English word of trash, it may be. But here's a definition of what rubbish is considered here on site. Any questions on this? So as long as it doesn't come in contact with an infectious, a hazardous, or a non-hazardous, this is rubbish. This is the stuff that we throw into our dumpsters on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so when it comes to waste determination, every department is going to be responsible for identifying waste determinations in their area. That's what the attachment number 2 document is that you guys have in front of you. That's the waste determination. And this is what we're going to go over to understand. Because what we're going to do is this information is going to be collected site-wide. It's going to be approved by our HSE department. The information itself is going to be stored in QuickBase, and then it's going to have an annual review. So that annual review will likely be the responsibility of department managers and supervisors, but the actual waste determination and creation of understanding that is best going to be probably at the level that you guys work at. So that's why we're going to go through this information.
Why are you going to put it in QuickBase? Not all of us can get to QuickBase.
It's not going to be put in by you into QuickBase. You'll put these forms in there, and then that information is stored in QuickBase, and then the review at the managerial level will be done within QuickBase.
But if I want to look at this form to find out how to throw something away, it's already been put into QuickBase. How do I do that?
Yeah, so the forms themselves can be posted at the department level if that's what the people at the department want to know. So access to the information is going to be given to the employees at the discretion of what the department feels is best for them. I would recommend, if I was running a department, I would get all my waste determinations and then I would post them so my employees would know. We're leaving that up to the department on how they want to manage that individually. If that's something that you need, I would go to whoever your first line supervisor is and says, hey, after we're done with these waste determinations, I think we should post them in our area so we know how to correctly do it. We're just not mandating it from our level on how to do that. We're kind of giving that information to the departments and allowing them to do it how they see fit. So, good question. Any others? All right, so let's go through the waste determination form. That's the form that is attachment 2. So this is UN 131 attachment 2. These forms are available on the K drive. So most people are familiar with how to navigate the K drive. Or if you're not, get with your first line supervisor and they can show you, because there is a plethora of information on the K drive. But we're going to start with waste determinations. Waste determinations and attachment 1, the waste handling, those are going to go hand in hand as we go through our exercises. 7 types of waste that we see on site: finished product, product label, semi-finished product, raw materials, manufacturing byproducts, laboratory byproducts, and just rubbish. Definitions for each one of these categories can be found in UN 131. I'm telling you, it's a good document to pull down and do, because the definitions help you completely understand what waste is and how you're supposed to handle it. So we're going to go through our first waste determination exercise, and the way that this works is we're going to work sections 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to come back a little later and do 2A, 3A, 4, and 5 for our exercise. So the first one that we're going to do, everyone's going to fill out their form for this one, is going to be use empty Merrick's NDV roller bottles. So if you will take out an attachment 2 blank one, when it comes to the department, what do you think you'll put if this was what you were doing? Merrick's department, right? So at the department, if you just go ahead and write in Merrick's, what building are they in? 8915. We'll make it easy. We're not trying to stump anyone on this information. This is just for us to better understand it. Okay, waste name. What do you think we're going to write there? Right? Empty Merrick's NDV roller bottles. All right, now on the description of the process that created the waste, this one might be known, but there you just put something like harvest of virus. So there's no standard answer there. It's just additional descriptions to help us understand what's going on. All right, so if we look into block 1 or step 1, identify waste type. When you look down through those items, it stinks that I haven't given you the definitions. I probably should print those out for the next group. But just based upon those lists and what we know in the room, what do we think we would list that as for step 1 when it comes to roller bottles? Manufactured by product, right? So when it comes to NDVs, the first box that we're going to mark is a manufacturing byproduct.
If it came out of R&D, then it might be laboratory byproduct.
Yes, if the roller bottles came out of R&D, they could be considered laboratory byproduct. But the good news is when it comes to tracking the waste, which is going to be form number 4 or attachment 4, that if there isn't a USDA license that requires the tracking of that waste within R&D, then it doesn't have to be tracked any further. Meaning you can dispose of that waste through regular Stericycle without us tracking the actual information, and we'll get to that in 4. Because that's a major change for, at least on our production side, is the USDA is now requiring us to be able to trace that track back to lot and serial numbers so that we can determine that it was truly cared for and disposed of properly throughout the process. So that's what created attachment number 4 that we'll see at the end of this presentation. All right, so step number 2, is the waste infectious? Anyone want to take a stab at it?
Yes.
Who knows about Merrick's, right? Yeah, it's infectious waste, right? So you would mark yes on step 2. And then we're going to leave 2A alone for right now, and we're going to go to step 3. Is it hazardous? Right? No, it's not, right? We've already established that it's infectious waste. But from a hazardous point of view, the answer to that would be no. All right, grab another sheet. We're going to do the same thing. But this time we're going to do it on the citric acid from the SDS. So now what I want you to do is to take a few minutes, go through the SDS and fill out sections, the header, so the Department, you can use your own department at this point in time. Your building, you can come up with your own waste name, your own description, and then try to do 1, 2, and 3. And I'll give you a few minutes to work on that. Feel free to work as a table if you want. Some people are sharing. Don't feel like you have to do these things all on your own. If you don't have any of the paperwork, if you want to go to a table that does, we have some additional training documents here, and you guys can get in with the group and play along. I'll give you 2 since you already missed one. It'll be fine. Who else needs some? I'll just give you guys 2 since there's 2 exercises left. If you want to go to a table where they have the rest of the documents, that you don't need those 2. Thank you. You can come up here and sit with Mike. He only slightly bites. Yeah, here. Who needs pens? Anyone need pens? Yep. There you go. Here you go. Oh, yeah, take that one. Yes. Oh, that's fine. We got a whole bag of them. Anyone else need a writing utensil?
I showed up for the first part of the other ones, but all of them didn't work.
All right, so let's start working through this as a group. If you haven't got all the questions correctly, that's all right. We'll work through it as a group. All right, so someone throw out a department for the header. Any department that you're in, that's fine. Building, I don't care about. What's the waste name? Say it again.
Citrus Surf 77 Plus.
Perfect. What do we use it for? Anyone want to?
Passivation.
What's that?
Passivated tank.
Okay, passivation of a tank. Again, the point of waste determination, at least for the header point, is to give you some additional information to help us as a company understand how we utilize this material. All right, so when it comes to identifying waste type, what are we going to pick?
I guess it depends on the lab, but it's a manufacturing or lab.
Look again at our list. I think if you had the definitions, it'd be a little bit better.
Well, I think for this example, we were going to use
It was going to be
unused.
Unused. Okay, yeah. So it'll be unused citric acid. So it hasn't been in any of our processes. It's just what's left over. I think we said it was expired. Sorry, it's supposed to be unused, expired. Say it again.
Raw material.
I heard it in the back. Yeah. So this example, sorry, is a raw material. I didn't give you guys enough information to make that determination. So it is a raw material. All right. Is the waste infectious? No. Correct? All right, so now number 3, is the waste hazardous? What are we going to mark there?
No.
It says the pH is less than 2 on the.
It says at 100% it's less than 2, but it's.
Yeah, so this is a raw.
It's only 10% solution. It says not hazardous.
It's the first time we've ever gone. Does it really say that?
Yeah, under section 3, composition information of citric acid, 10%.
Yeah, but it's saying add 100% of that bottle. The,
No,
the,
that's not what it's saying.
the chemical is 10% citric acid, but it's saying at 100% concentration of citrus surf 77, that's the pH.
Well, before we go deep down into the weeds, on this one, we wanted it to be a hazardous material.
Don't overcomplicate it, Sean.
Yeah, and we
I
wanted it
just
to
read the
be,
SDS like you told me to.
so we want it to be as reactive, right? So in our example, we would see that it would be reactive.
Corrosive.
Or I'm sorry, corrosive, outside the pH level of 2.1 or above 12.4. Then we're going to do one more of sections 1, 2, and 3. Then we'll come back to these and do sections 2A, 3A, 4, and 5. The last one that we're going to do is use QC testing material containing chloroform and thimerosal. Just to give you a hint, this one you will use attachment 1 to help you with. So again, on the header section, I'll let you guys come up with whatever you want for at least the department in the building. The waste name, we kind of have an idea of what it's going to be from the slide in front of us, along with how it is utilized.
And thimerosal is mercury. We consider it to be mercury, so.
You're good, brother. Come on. Okay. Got enough room there? Yeah, all right. All right, so if we were going to identify the waste type,
This is awfully.
what are we going to define this as? Look at the department. And then based upon that, what do we think is our best answer for step 1? Laboratory byproduct. Yep. Step 2, is this material infectious?
Probably not anymore.
Yeah, probably not anymore. So we're going to select no for this one.
Unless it fails that test.
And then, yeah, depending on, yeah, it could be. But for our own purposes of this exercise, we're going to pretend that it is not.
Yep.
Step 3, is the waste hazardous? What are we going to select for step 3?
Toxic.
Toxic. Who said that? Why?
Because it is toxic. It's got mercury in it. and-
It's higher than the level.
So you just have a gut feeling, right?
Yeah.
All right, where does it show up on our list? So when you go into attachment 1, what do you see? Yeah, figure 1. So what's the heading of figure 1? When you look at the top of the table, what does it say? Toxic characteristics, right? And then what do we see in the listing there? Is chloroform listed?
Yeah.
D what? See the item out to the side?
009.
009, right? What about mercury?
That was mercury.
Oh,
The chloroform is 002. 022.
022, right? So both of those items are listed underneath figure 1 of attachment number 1 that determines toxic characteristics. So on step 3, we would identify toxic as the waste hazard.
Are they both above the threshold quantity?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So then this could also be on the P list or the U list, but the thing to remember with those two lists is the ingredient has to be the sole active ingredient or the pure chemical form. So for this one, I believe chloroform is on one of those lists, but since it's not the sole active ingredient because there's mercury in it as well, so then it's not on the P or U list. But
And
when you
we'll talk
check
about-
those lists, just remember that's for pure unused chemicals or something that's the sole active ingredient, so a dilution of an ingredient.
Yeah, they're both on the U list.
They're both on the U list, but because they're together in the mixture, you wouldn't apply the U list for that.
All right, so liquid waste, hazardous waste, and infectious waste containers. We're gonna kind of change gears now, and we're gonna talk about how we contain this material. It must be stored and transported in a manner that prevents spills. What does that mean to a regulatory agency? It simply means if you were to knock that container over, would the contents of that container stay in? Right? So universal waste is something that's regulated. Part of universal waste is light bulbs. We collect used light bulbs in boxes, and at the end of the box, it's just the 4 flaps of the cardboard, right? No material stuck to it, just the 4 flaps. We would store those, and we wouldn't do anything with those 4 flaps. Are we in accordance with regulation when it comes to, would it prevent spills for that box? No, that's what, I mean, this is the level of detail that we're looking at when it comes to, regulations. So we have to either dog ear that or tape that box so that we can demonstrate that if the contents were tipped over, that nothing would fall out of that box. So the same thing for all of our other containers. They should always be closed unless you're actively adding to them. The only thing that doesn't really need to have a top on it is this indoor trash containers. So the things that you see around here that are generally open. Everything else, it's best to have a lid on it. All right, when it comes to infectious waste, we ship off most of the time, but there are cases where we render non-infectious waste. What's an example of something that we usually treat on site that would, in its previous state before it was treated, be considered an infectious waste, but because of treatment, it now goes into a rubbish category? Anyone want to take a guess? How many people have autoclaves in their area? Right? So if we put infectious waste into an autoclave, we treat it through the autoclave method. I don't even care what it is, just a bag of what would eventually be PP or something that came in contact with infectious waste. If you autoclave that, would you have to treat that waste after it was autoclaved as infectious waste, or would it be rubbish? Right? It would be trash, right? Sometimes we do very low number of roller bottles, right? And they can treat those with bleach. Those roller bottles wouldn't have to be disposed of through our Stericycle. We could actually throw those away. That's what we're talking about when it comes to chemically treating or autoclaving waste that was once infectious that would then be rendered as rubbish. When it comes to sharps, we always collect sharps to be treated off-site. So your pipette tips, anything that would be considered a sharp. I'll go ahead and bring it out now. There is a line on attachment 4, which we'll see at the end of the thing, that specifically mentions sharps containers, and it's been a little bit of confusion because if you put sharps into a Stericycle bin, we're going to consider that a Stericycle bin and not a sharp. So the sharp container on attachment number 4 that you guys see is actually when we have the large sharp boxes that we get from Stericycle that just go into the cardboard box itself. But I'll show you that later on. I think you guys all bag currently, right? Is everyone familiar with how we handle infectious waste? It goes into red Stericycle bags, and then those bags are goosenecked, tied, and then put into Stericycle bins. I don't think that's anything new. We understand that this is the biohazard legend that is on most of our Stericycle bins and the bags. All right, so 2 ways to meet DOT standards when it comes to sealing a Stericycle bag or just a bag in general is the single knot. So you wind up your remaining material of your bag and then you tie that into a single knot. Or the method that we use most of the time here on campus is a gooseneck. Once again, you wind up material, you fold it over on itself, and then you secure those 2 edges together to create a gooseneck knot. I don't think I'm sharing any brilliant information with you at this point. After the bag's closed, it must be put into an O1 container or a micro bin. These bins are what we're using over in the Greenfield now to process our roller bottles out of Merrick's, and I think everyone is familiar with the smaller Stericycle bins as well. We store these to prevent the transmission of diseases. Containers must be in good working condition at all time and maintained in a professional manner, if you will. All right, how can we treat infectious waste on site? What methods can we use? Bing bang, right? Right, 2 techniques that we can use. Hazardous waste, how is it created on site? My good key is if you're dealing with hazardous waste, you're going to pass it off to a facilities technician. Right? That's the best, like, just, I don't know, do we neutralize anything, Kevin, on site that we consider hazardous? What are the few things that we do?
Yeah, so mainly it's like if you use CIP 100, then you neutralize it with CIP 220, and acid
With the
neutralizing with the base. So that's the only time that we can treat a hazardous waste is if the sole reason it's hazardous is because it's corrosive, so the pH, then we can neutralize that to a pH neutral between 5.5 and 10.5 if it's going to go down the drain. If it's corrosive and toxic, or corrosive and inflammable, or anything else, then it has to be shipped off. The only thing we can do is solely corrosive, we can neutralize it.
So like the pilot lab has a neutralization tank for pH adjustment. It's one of the only ones.
So when in doubt, get facilities technicians involved that have a little bit more background to how to best handle hazardous waste, or at least on site. Mary, of course, is a great source of information when it comes to understanding how to handle hazardous waste. And so always ask if you don't know. All right, there are 2 types of areas where hazardous waste gets collected. The first one is a satellite. Most people in production deal with a satellite area. So a satellite definition is at or near the generation spot. And then accumulation, and this is where we collect larger volumes of material to be shipped off to our hazardous material handling contractor. How many people have satellite areas in their departments? No one deals with satellite areas?
There's one on the dock here.
Yeah, most docks have, which would be a questionable satellite area. This is the biggest challenge that we have, is that generally accumulations are in the production space. It generally gets moved to a dock area, which would be a satellite to satellite transfer, which is not by regulation and then move to our accumulation area. But we do what we can do, right? Like, there's the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. Well, at least that's what I would try to go with. So, transferring always should be from a satellite area directly to an accumulation area when it comes to appropriately handling hazardous waste. Let's talk about satellite areas. You can only store one container of any one waste stream. Okay, so don't confuse that as just one container, right? You can have a container for each one of your waste streams that can collect that material into. What's the largest that we can store in a satellite area, volume-wise?
I don't know, but I just see you guys use those drums.
What's that?
You
There you
guys use the drums, right?
Yeah, drum. How big is it?
55.
55-gallon drum, right? And then waste containers must be moved within 3 days once they are full. Okay, does that make sense? So in the accumulation area, it can stay there for as long as it needs to until it gets full. And then once it's full, you have 3 days to move it from the satellite area to the accumulation area. Make sense? Pretty simple. All right. We do have time limits for how long we can store hazardous material on site. We consider ourselves to be in between the small and large quantity generators, which go from 90 to 180 days. We ourselves, we try to manage it under 90 days so that we're never in trouble if we did for some reason go over the allowed volume that we're allowed to keep or transport at one point in time. We do weekly inspections at our hazardous material accumulation area. That's done by the facilities. The container itself must be 50 feet away from the property line, and that must be, the items inside must be stored in accordance with compatibility. We have emergency aisles and all the regulations required to have an accumulation area. So for those that don't know, our accumulation area right now are the two mobile pods that sit in between 8930 and 8936 in the parking lot. Some general information when it comes to the hazardous waste area. Let you read through those. I don't think there's anything that we haven't really talked about. They are marked with hazardous waste or non-hazardous waste stickers. Here's some examples that we have up here of how we mark that material. We also will put their characteristics on the labels themselves. These are new labels that we actually just got in so that you could identify through a pictogram of what characteristics that the material have as well. Some examples. Again, information when it comes to the containers themselves. The one that I will point out is probably most important for you guys is efficiency is always something that we try to do, right? But when it comes to filling up containers, I don't want you to be 100% efficient, right? I don't want you to fill that container all the way up. It's best to leave, it's required. You have to leave headspace in case that material expands or vents. And so a good rule, I'm okay with 75%. To me, that's an okay thing. We had an issue where we were transferring alcohol into barrels and actually filled up the barrel and then the funnel, and we had ourselves a little incident because the employees were trying to do the right thing, which was to fill the barrel all the way up, and that lack of headspace caused some issues for how we were going to pull that funnel and handle that material. So keep in mind, I don't need you to get that thing filled to the last drop. Leave space. 75% is a good rule to follow. Okay, we've talked about neutralizing corrosive materials. So that's it. Information that we've already provided. and then the underlined statement at the end. So when it comes to corrosivity, we can treat it. Anything else, it's not treated on site. There is non-hazardous waste that we do handle in accordance with UN 093, and that's simply making sure that we do not put a non-hazardous waste that is toxic into the water stream or environment. If you have any additional questions on this, HSE can always provide guidance. Okay, we've talked about satellite areas. I think until we're blue in the face. Near the point of generation, 55 gallons or less. Once a container is full, you date that container, and then you have 3 days from that date to move it to an accumulation area. These are accumulation areas when it comes to rubbish and recycling. I'll let you read through that. Waste classification, activity. All right, so let's go back to our sheets. We're going to start with the first one, which was the Merrick's bottle. We're going to do 3A, 4, and 5. Oh, I'm sorry, 2A. 2A, 3A, 4, and 5. So let's just go through these together quickly. Step 2A, when it comes to treatment for empty Merrick's roller bottles. If you don't know, we do one thing with those right now. What is that one thing? We Stericycle them, and they're going to do what with them? Incinerate them, right? So you can go ahead and mark incineration in 2A for our roller bottle exercise. So now we're going to make a final waste classification determination for roller bottles. So what would be the answer for number 4 based upon what we have marked so far on our sheet? Roller bottles infected with NDB. They're going to be incinerated, but what did we answer for step 2? Infectious, right? So this is an infectious waste. Step 5, description of final waste disposal method, right? So roller bottles are bagged appropriately and transferred to facilities for disposal. Something simple like that will work for the first answer of step 5. And then lastly, you just put the name and title and the date of the determination to complete the form.
Dan,
Yes.
are they only classified as infectious because they're not incinerated on site? Like if we autoclave the bag of roller bottles,
Correct.
would that just be classified as rubbish?
Rubbish, correct. But because we have done no treatment to these bottles, right? We've taken them from a lab, we've bagged them, we've moved them over to our area. A lot of people will question, but there's been no treatment to that viral material inside of those roller bottles. So that's why we classify it as infectious.
So then, would you put that in step 5? Would you say autoclave and then handle as rubbish, or?
Well, again, that depends on your treatment method. So,
But like if say that they were autoclaved, like if it was a small run, they autoclave them, we decide it's rubbish, then yeah, so then, yeah, on step 5, would you just say autoclaved?
for me, for a department, I would do 2 determination forms. I would have one that would be untreated and one that would be treated, because those are going to be very different waste determination streams, if you will. So I know Merrick's, I don't think they would ever treat roller bottles just because of simple numbers. So if you have a department that deals with lower numbers or something that you can treat, and then there are other times where you wouldn't treat it, I would just create 2 determinations, one of being something that was treated and one that was being untreated. Because ultimately what you're trying to do in waste determination is determine how you process that waste itself. So if there are going to be 2 different methods, then you have 2 different waste determination forms. Does that make sense?
So, like, you would do another one at the top, autoclaved roller ball.
Right, because you don't have to do this every time you create waste. This is a one-time
Yeah.
process that gets reviewed annually. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that, when it came to the description, it might be, treated roller bottles versus untreated.
Gotcha.
All right. When it comes to emergencies, I think that HSE just sent out an email on our emergency plan that we have on site that needs to be reviewed annually. Does everybody get that right? So everybody has to review that, I think, before the end of December. But ideally what there is a contingency plan that we have on site for how to deal with hazardous materials. This involves our local police departments, our local firefighters, other residents in this area. This is information that we provide to help people understand what to do in case of an emergency. Key takeaway for you guys is contact your supervisor immediately if you feel like there has been some event that could fall into the emergency category. Anytime you go near our accumulation area, you'll see that there are emergency contacts posted. Our goal in understanding this is that you'll see a list of employees. If you are not one of these employees listed, we want you to call an employee, because you'll see in the bottom part of the list there are actual reporting agency numbers that you can also call. We would prefer someone who understands the contingency plan to contact a higher level authority, if you will. So if you believe that we're in an emergency, you go to an area, you find a number, we want you to call an employee on that list, and then the employee will call the correct agency for when it comes to handling emergencies. All right, we have spill kits at accumulation areas. We have 2 SOPs that regulate spills, UN 084 and UN 085. Emergency action plan is HS 007. So again, these are great SOPs to read and understand. I would highly recommend it, as well as the emergency action plan. Okay, UN 131. This is the 2 attachments that we've been working on. There's one more attachment that I want to go through, and we probably should have printed some off for you guys to have. But that's attachment 4. And attachment 4 is the form that is going to be used to track all manufacturing byproduct and laboratory byproducts that have to be traced back to its source of origin for the USDA. So right now, Merrick's is utilizing, actually everybody's supposed to be because it's in effect. I have to figure out who my problem child is on 8901 dock that's pushing Stericycle bins out without attachment number 4. But what attachment number 4 is simply a high-level tracking mechanism that allows us to understand waste and how we can bring it back to a serial or a lot number. Make a note to print some of these next time for the training tomorrow. So attachment number 4, what it does is it allows the department that is producing the waste, whether it be infectious waste, primarily infectious waste is what we're dealing with here, back to a serial or lot or ID number. So what happens is in Merrick's, I'll just use that as an example, they will produce 110 bags of roller bottles. So here they'll list, hey, we have 110 bags of roller bottles and 2 bags of infectious trash. Now this says trash bag, which has caused some confusion. This is in trash that has come in contact with infectious waste. If it's just trash, we don't care about it if it goes to the dumpster. This is just stuff that we would need to treat in order to satisfy tracking it back to the serial or lot number for the USDA. So they would fill out this information, and then they would bring all of this over to my facilities guys in the Greenfield lot. They would count all of the material to make sure that it's all accounted for, and they sign that this has been transferred over to them. And then once they load all of that material up into the trailer, they have a manifest number that they'll assign to it so that when Stericycle does the destruction of it, they'll report back that this manifest was destroyed. Then we can then track our manifest back to a serial number. If you use Stericycle bins, the same thing, infectious waste container. How many Stericycle bins did you produce and what does it go to? Now when it comes to R&D, manufacturing, we know everything's going to be tracked by either a serial or a lot number. When it comes to R&D, we're only concerned with what the USDA from a permit point of view would require us to track. So we don't have to track all R&D waste, and I'm trying to get a meeting with Anita and Bearcat for me to better understand what the USDA would require us to track out of R&D. But it's not going to be all waste for R&D, but there is specific stuff that we will have to track where you will check, hey, this was for R&D. There may be a project number associated with it, but then we would track that waste as well out of the facilities. So for our production people, this is a major change for some people, right? Maybe not all laboratory employees, but the people that do handle the waste, they have to do it in accordance with this attachment 4. Questions?
So since we've got multiple users out there using this one Stericycle bin, we're going to have to go ahead and generate an individual form for each individual.
Yeah, let me go back and address that. So from a facilities point of view, as long as it all goes back to an individual identification or a lot, I don't care what's inside. You want to put 10 bags, and as long as it all goes back to an identification number, all I care about is one Stericycle bin, right? So that would be one here. If you have sharps and something else in there, that's fine. The true contents doesn't matter. It's simply for us what lot number it is and how we destroyed it on site. So what manifest did it go out with on Stericycle? Go ahead, Bailey.
So, sorry, I'm a little confused about this.
Okay.
So where it says infectious waste container, that's how many Stericycle containers there are?
Correct.
So, but all the other ones, you fill those out as well.
If you have
What's in
something.
there?
Right.
So-
No, not inside. Again, so sometimes people will just bring us infectious waste trash bags.
Gotcha.
So that's a line for them just to go, hey, here's our 2 infectious waste trash bags.
So if we're throwing away one cereal and it takes 10 Stericycle containers, we fill out a different one for each, or you just put 10 and then put the lot.
As long as it all came back to the same lot number.
Okay.
So yeah, if it was a single lot number and 10, yeah, one form, single lot number, 10 infectious waste containers, and then that gets transferred to facilities.
And before we used to put like stickers on those with the tracking number, we don't do that anymore. That happens after we fill this out.
So if the stickering process for you guys, if you don't track it, it doesn't need to change. Before, those stickers were important because that's how we were tracking it. So where the disconnect with the USDA was, we could never take that bin number and point it back to anything. All we could say was, we had a bin, this was the bin number, it went out.
Yeah.
So the difference, so to us, the bin numbers are important because that's how Stericycle tracks those bins, so continue to put those bin numbers on there. But for us, internal tracking, those bin numbers don't mean anything. It's just going to be this lot number and then the total count of those bin numbers together.
Okay, so we just need to fill this out now.
Exactly.
So what I'm asking is, we have that one container out there on the dock, and multiple groups are using. Sometimes you'll go ahead, you'll see samples coming in from like one department. These will be waste product from a freezer that's just completed a rundown on that, that's just leftovers, that didn't pass the test. And then there's already stuff in it. Is there going to need to be a separate log for each one of those separate processes?
Yeah, so if we're sharing bins, we have to get away from that practice, right? So the best way would be a bin per some sort of unique identification. Now what's inside, it could be multiple bags, but again, it needs to come back to the one. So if we have a process where there's an open bin and hey, everybody just contributes to its full, it gets packed up and go, we need to get away from that process. Any other questions?
So we can give you guys just a sharps container with this? We don't have
Yeah, so the sharps container that's listed on here, these were the bigger boxes that we got from Stericycle that were like the cardboard boxes that we put sharps in. I think the only people using that process were Merrick's at one point in time. They've switched and gone away from it now, so they're now putting all their sharps into Stericycle bins. So this area right here where it says sharps container, it was really meant for that big cardboard box that we would process by itself. But if you are used to putting your sharps into a Stericycle bin, I would keep that process. And then therefore, this line right here would be in and it would just be down into a Stericycle bin itself.
And then you wouldn't, for serial lot ID number, would you just put sharps container, or what do you put?
Oh, if it doesn't have so it'd just be sharps in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, I would just make a Stericycle bin, and I would probably NA that, unless those sharps were, because they're gonna be from a lot of different
Yeah.
lots, right? Yeah, I would try to put them in with a bin that had a lot number, and then that way it would just be cleaner. What are your thoughts?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you manage individual
Yeah,
sharp setters.
our goal in creating this form was to make it as simple as possible because it's really a complicated thing what we're doing here. And the level of detail that you could get, you could just kill yourself. I mean, at one point in time where we're talking about, okay, we're gonna track every bin by the unique bin number stickers that we put on there, and it just, you're talking about an impossibility when it comes to the amount of waste that we generate. So we're trying to do the high level. So I'll talk with Mary about that example and see if we can, if there's a best solution that she would like for that, but that's kind of a tricky one.
Yeah, because sometimes we put stuff that's not lock controlled
Into, and I think that would be fine, because it's not lock controlled. Let me get Mary's opinion on that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah. With us, Merrick's distribution, we have one bin and we just, 1-2 amps go in there like the end of the run. There could be 100 cereals in there. We have to fill that for every single, is that correct? Okay.
Another example of something we're probably gonna have to look at to determine how we satisfy, because that's finished product, right?
It needs to be tracked.
Yeah, and it would
But
need
there,
to be
there
tracked.
should be some other mechanism that maybe we could just attach to this, like a destructo form.
Yeah, we use the destructive forms.
And then just put a copy of it with this or something.
With the form itself, yeah, so,
List all the individual serial numbers that went in it.
yeah, I
It
think
happens
some-
often enough to where we probably should go ahead and get the answer for that one.
Yeah.
You write that, so for College Crossing, we'll definitely need to get a determination, yeah, if it all
The
goes
seed
into
coordinators would probably,
destructive.
the seed coordinators might need that too, where they generate multiple lots at a time. and
Right, and they're just
their
showing
sharps
lots
and-
of stuff, so we will bring that up to Mary and management, try to get a suitable answer for that, cause that will, yeah, again, we need it, and it sounds like you guys are already tracking it in Destructo, so that has a method, so it'd just be a matter of how do we complete the circle when it comes to this. Sean, you got a question too?
Yeah, it goes back to, I guess, the core form of aerosol. How do you, when you add the mixtures, how do you figure out which way you're supposed to dispose of it?
So,
Like, we have kits that contain multiple chemicals in the same bottle.
Yeah.
That we'd like to get rid of. Which one of those chemicals is the one that I go by?
Does that have an SDS for the overall mixture?
Yeah.
Check that.
It just
Go off the
says
SDS.
check your regulations. Like it's the most worthless SDS.
Yeah, they always do that. You just gotta check pH, check if it's reactive, and check if any of the constituents meet the toxic level on the first list. If not, then we would probably, if it's an irritant or anything, then we'd ship it off as non-haz.
Okay.
But if it meets any of those other characteristic wastes, then that's what, you just gotta go off the SDS.
Okay.
and what we can do is, on examples like that, I mean, that's where we need to just involve health and safety, we just need to come together and try to, help classify that the best that we can. We don't wanna get into the habit of just trying to classify everything as infectious, hazardous, or non-hazardous and have it processed, because that does cost money to the company. So we wanna make sure that our classifications are good, so that when we process it, we make sure that we're doing it in the most efficient method. But it never hurts to get a team, together to help make determinations. Any other questions? Couldn't ask them until I showed this slide. Start over. Okay, so UN 131, it's a great read. There's a lot of information. I think a lot of at least even the definition part, I think if you go through the definitions, that's a great way to learn. But it is in effect onto the site. So if you are not utilizing attachment 4 from a manufacturing point of view and you are processing manufacturing byproducts, we need to get you spun up immediately on that form so that you're utilizing it. For our R&D folks, we need to have an understanding of what the USDA would consider to be worthy of tracking versus what's not trackable, because the waste determination form would need to be used for those trackable items from a permit point of view. And other than that, for everyone else, it's a matter of probably going to help your first line supervisor or manager understand how to best do waste determinations within your departments. That's where you're going to come into play for this process quicker.
So what's the deadline for getting these completed for department?
I think Mary had put out that end of the year, right, is what her goal was. It's going to take, this has never been done, and you're talking about something that will probably take upwards of 4 or 5 months and constant pry within the departments. I'll look to Mary to really come up, because to me that's a managerial decision that we need to look at. This is something that has always been a requirement that we've never done.
I would say at least by the end of the year we need to identify all the waste streams so that we at least know how many we still have to do. I mean, that is to me a realistic goal, if not just completing all of these for them. Does that make sense or not?
Yeah, no, I think that it does. And probably
how many of these forms do we expect to have to fill out? Because I agree, I think this is probably closer to a 4 or 5 month project to actually complete.
I can't even begin to imagine how many it is.
And then on the annual review, do we refill out this form or do we just look at the form?
No,
and
so
see
it's
if
going, so that's going to be a quick base for those that do the annual review. That will be on quick base just to make sure that it hasn't changed.
So then does this become part of like change control or new product development type stuff where it's like we have to fill this out before production even really begins or something, so that we're not, oh, we needed to add a new one and we never did because it's not.
I think that's what the annual review is about too. It would be adding to it as well. Now, whether you added to it in, the development or where I don't think that there's been any thought to where you add the determination into in the process, meaning is it a part of a change control or new product development where they're filling this stuff out,
but they signed for change control, so they'll know
where it is on there. So to me, I feel like a person could do this as their full-time job, just trying to manage this. It's pretty onerous, but together everyone achieves more. So there's my teamwork speech for the day. I'm sure you guys are fired up by it. So appreciate the enthusiasm coming out of the group right now. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Again, I'm sure everyone wants to go and look at UN 131 right away. I highly recommend that. If you have any questions about any of the attachments or the waste determination, HSE is always available. Kevin and Mary and Logan are great resources. You can always contact me. I will do my best to point you to Kevin, Logan, or Mary. Managerial skill 101, and go from there. So thank you for your time, your attention. Do me a favor, leave behind your training materials outside of the documents that you filled out.